Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
My guest is Leslie Gaston-Bird. She's an overachiever in every sense of the word. She's a mix engineer, a sound designer, a composer, an author. She's worked in recording, in post-production, in broadcast for NPR and other public radio. She's worked in psychoacoustics. She's taught audio and post-production at the University of Colorado in Denver. She is currently in the United Kingdom working on her doctorate in immersive workflows. I don't know what else I can say about this person except that she's like, I wonder when she sleeps. But other than that, let's just get into a few things. I know you also are heavily involved with the Audio Engineering Society. That's actually, I believe, how we met. She is the author of Women in Audio, which is an amazing book that I've only had time to thumb through. And I didn't realize until just a moment ago that she also wrote a book about math in audio, which is enough to pretty much drive away anybody who's not really hardcore into it. So indeed, the epitome of an overachiever. And I would say she's also one of the most in-demand interviews in pro audio. So I will admit, I was even actually hesitant to ask you to be on the show because I figured, what else could I ask you that other people haven't already talked to you about? But conversely, I couldn't imagine not having you on the show. So let's just get into a little bit of your career path, because it's been obviously real sneaky and all over the place and stuff like that. But clearly you have a musical background as well as a technical background. And I'm always interested in how those worlds converge and diverge in people's careers. So tell me a little bit about your own background and how you ended up where you are now.
Well, thanks. And let me just say it's an honor to be invited on your show. Thanks for having me. So I started playing piano at an early age. I took lessons in classical piano. I didn't know about audio as a career until I was maybe 16, 17 years old, that it was something that you could major in. And in 1985, around that time, there weren't, recording programs in every city on the planet. There were only a couple. So, that's a very interesting question about how they converge and diverge. I had thought I might major in piano or composition. I didn't think I wanted to be a performer. I probably could have been, but I went to Indiana University, go Hoosiers, and thought, and the reason I chose Indiana was because of their recording studio. I had been to some other schools, and I remember there was one university I went to, I won't say who it was, but they had a music technology program, which was literally a synthesizer in a closet.
Ooh.
And I thought, this can't possibly be a major. It was a beautiful piece of equipment, but,
But it was all. Yeah, it was the only piece of equipment. And it was in the closet.
Yeah. So, I just thought, But at IE, they had, beautiful studios, 16-track, lots of knobs and faders, and I wanted to do that. So I thought I was going to do composition and audio. But I auditioned for Indiana, and I didn't get in. And I tried not to be devastated. But so I just went, the audio route, and I kept playing as a hobby. I picked up bass guitar and played in some rock bands, and I still play, compose and stuff. But so I guess that's what happened.
Well, that's always interesting to me how, you go into the studio with, your first band or whatever it is, your first foray into the studio, and some of us just go, yeah, cool. I really love the way that engineer made me sound. And other people just go, ooh, twinkly lights. I need to learn to drive that. And it's the whole kind of tech versus creative. And at the same time, right brain, left brain, they govern everything, including how we play our instruments and everything. So it's not that they're completely divorced. They are definitely intertwined, but it's always interesting to me when people say, yeah, I fell in love with the technology side of it? Because it's a
Yeah.
different kind of creativity, isn't it?
It's a challenge. I think I was in high school. I can't remember, like most teenagers, was dealing with my own personal angst and demons
What?
and stuff. But I know, right? Adolescence is a bear. But I remember coming across an article that said something about diving off of a high dive. The high diving board, the 10 feet high or whatever it is. And I have a really, internalized sensation of what it's like to jump off of that higher diving platform. And it does, overcoming that fear is definitely, visceral sensation. I don't know if that's the right word. But when it comes to technology, I have that same sort of sensation of somebody, if I see one of the larger boards like a DFC or a digital film console or just some massive thing. Yeah, I get the high dive feeling. I'm like, I bet I could learn that. And in college and stuff, I mean, I would eat manuals for breakfast. I would read a manual from page 0 to page 240 and want to understand every single thing about how the thing operated. So
You must have been fun at parties.
Still am. I still am. And I reviewed a piece of equipment for a manufacturer recently, and I pointed out something like a missing menu item in one of their block diagrams. And, it's just like, you didn't put the path to the optical, and they were thinking, oh, thanks, Leslie. That's not what we wanted from you, but thank you. Just not.
As a person who used to write those manuals, I understand, and yeah, it's interesting too, because on the one hand, I think a lot of people perceive you as, the way I describe it a lot of times is I feel like your pocket protector is way bigger than mine, and so it's interesting to hear that you experience that as well, because for a lot of us, I think especially in these creative fields, there's this intimidation factor about the technology where, like, I can play a guitar just fine or whatever, but don't put me in front of a big console. And, both of us teach, being in a position of teaching recording, you start to understand how to break those concepts down to be able to explain them to lay persons. But at the same time, I think there's always that sort of, I mean, clearly you're telling me that there's still always that apprehension of, do I really grok this?
Yeah, it's, it's excitement, it's intimidation. And then there's also the extra layer of belonging and place. And, I didn't used to have it. I think this is a very strange dichotomy of where I find myself now advocating for women and underrepresented groups in audio, where when I was 18, 20, 28, I didn't feel a sense of not belonging. I just went in there and did it. But what it's when you look back, you sort of sense, what was the perception of other people about, how I belonged in that space. And it's compounded, I think, moving to England, where it's just, I was referred to by another professional as a unicorn. It's just like, we don't see Black women doing this. And I'm like, okay, I'll be a unicorn, whatever. So, I'm where I want to be. So it's letting an industry and people's acceptance of you define you is a mistake unless you're actively helping people who have that same illusion, and I think that's where I come in. If I think that discrimination is real, I think that exclusion is real, but I also think that you can be in a headspace where you choose not to see it. You could call it denial, but you could also call it empowerment.
I agree with you. And I think that's a really interesting, you segued perfectly into one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because that is, I just had this conversation the other day with another colleague, and she said something very similar. The idea that yes, you can recognize this discrimination, you can choose to make it your enemy, you can choose to let it piss you off and infuriate you, and to a certain extent paralyze you, or you can choose to diminish its power by not acknowledging it. And one of the things that I think you have done very effectively is to take that elephant in the room and turn it into a tiny little thing. And I think that's one of the things that I think is very, very valuable, especially to a lot of younger women coming into the industry. The way you've built this community, one of the things that I think you have passed along and are passing along is this idea that we're not going to create an adversarial condition where I'm mad at you because you're discriminating against me. We're going to create a situation where I look at that discrimination and I just go, I'm not going to acknowledge it, the same way that you're not going to refer to me as a male engineer. I'm not going to refer to you as a female engineer. I'm going to refer to you as a colleague, and I'm going to hopefully be able to establish a working relationship that has absolutely nothing to do with gender or genitalia.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's where we want to be.
That's our perfect world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the perfect world. I mean, the reality is there is an elephant.
Yep.
I liked what you said about diminishing it to a mouse. I was thinking I would rebut that by saying I'm eating the elephant in small bites.
That's another good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's there, but we're gonna chip away at it, and I find it delicious. It's something like that. But yeah, I mean to have, and that's the thing. I've had men who were mentors. Roy Pritz, Rich Sanders, David Pickett, Wayne Jackson. Those were my mentors. Those are the professors that taught me.
Some good ones.
The people who welcomed me, the late great, right? Roy and Rich are no longer with us, but being invited to England, that was Dave Mallam at University of York. So no, it's not adversarial. I mean, there's great knowledge to be had, when you form these relationships and you're part of these networks. And understanding how important these networks are, but then also, I think in writing the book Women in Audio, I found other mentors who I didn't know I had. Terry Winston is a mentor.
I love Terry. Absolutely.
Of Women's Audio Mission just by her work. Carrie Keyes of Sound Girls is a mentor because of her trailblazing, right? So the mentorship and the nature of mentorship changes as you have role models, as you find women who have been in the industry as long as you, who have been, breaking barriers and doing great work.
And building community.
But they need to be made visible.
Yeah. And I think, part of that, and part of what I really love about what Wham is doing, what Sound Girls are doing, and I think also, other organizations, other groups like, the AES has definitely been very proactive in that. John Crivet and Hey Audio Student, a lot of these groups that are really trying to encourage not just more women, but the lack of power of the whole discriminatory environment, to be able to reduce that whole old boys network into something that we don't have to rail against actively as much as we have to just build something that takes away from it, that takes away its power by welcoming more people, by building this community and welcoming more women, welcoming more people of color. I think that really is, to me, one of the most beautiful things about what you're doing and what a lot of other people are doing is just, we're ignoring that elephant, and no, we're not ignoring it. You're right. We're acknowledging that it exists, and we're saying, okay, we're not going to give it power. We're not going to feed it.
Yeah, there you go. It's, I was taken to task. Well, I wouldn't say taken to task. When we were doing the diversity and inclusion work with the Audio Engineering Society, we were trying to, wordsmith. And I think one of the things said, we want to be welcoming. And I think we had, the members of the committee and I had this discussion. It's like, the welcoming that's not the word. Welcoming is not the word. We need to be active in changing things. So we need role models, mentoring networks, and we need to change the dynamic of visibility. Because if you go to a conference and, all you see is, your 11th
Old white dudes.
Special Life panel with Chuck Ainley, it's like he's great, but seriously, 11 years in a row, we got to find something. So I mean, and nothing bad against Chuck Ainley and his work. I loved Brothers in Arms; it's a great album. But there's, there are other great people out there doing great things, and I love what our committee did and is doing in the AES. With the equity learning series that Liz Teutsch and Jonathan Weiner, the AES past president, are putting together.
Jonathan's
all of those opportunities to learn, and it makes things more interesting. Wow, it makes things more interesting when you can see Carolina Anton of Gora Gora Studios in Mexico and her Sonido Immersivo, which is immersive sound, and it makes it more interesting when you can talk to Willie Green, Paul Womack, who I think is an AS governor now, do a track breakdown of a hip hop song. I mean, that's super interesting. He did, I can't remember, it was something about an ostrich. If you're out there, Willie, just inbox me the name of the song. But it was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard, with brass instruments and beats and rap, and and it hit you like a brick wall. That's interesting, and it's interesting to see Anna Monti, who is of Delta Soundworks. She's Brazilian, she's living in Germany, and she's doing virtual reality, where she's got the Stanford Virtual Heart Experiment, where you can use virtual sounds to identify heart defects. Wow, that's what I want to see. All of that.
But, to your point, I think what you've just listed is a whole bunch of really cool stuff that has no gender identity, that has no racial identity, and that's, I mean, one of the things.
Well, it does,
but it doesn't revolve around it. It doesn't base its whole premise on it. And that, what I think is sad sometimes when I hear of sisters who have been treated so badly that they say, you know what, I don't even want to work with men anymore, because we all have something to give each other, and we all have things we can learn from each other. And, I hate to preach inclusion, but that's what it is. It's like, we all should be able to get past that shit,
Or celebrate our differences.
Yeah,
that's what I want to do. And
Absolutely.
not instead of trying to be colorblind, trying to be color rich. And enjoy the tapestry of cultures and things that are part of our world.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've worked in education a lot too, and that obviously, I think that also colors not only the way we learn, because obviously everybody who teaches learns at the same time, but also I think it does color also your ability and your perspective on inclusiveness, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I learned so many lessons about trying to cater to the students at University of Colorado who were primarily white and primarily male. And it's sort of like, after doing it for years and years, you find yourself, wanting to be their peer and wanting to be, their leader. And so you sort of adopt certain cultural norms. You try to sort of like relate. You want to be relatable. And then you find out, when you start to get more women in the classroom, you can feel yourself changing your script, your teaching script. It's like, okay, so my classroom has changed in this way. I need to make sure I'm being inclusive. I remember, it just broke my heart. There was a student, it wasn't my student, it was a student at one of the chapters I visited, who said their classmates were doing a hip hop thing and they wanted him to do some of that Yo Boy stuff for this like commercial they were making. And he's like, no, I'm not going to be like, hey, what up, dog? I'm not
I'm not gonna be your token cultural icon.
No. Yeah. And so, to bring that up and to be comfortable talking to me about it, it's like, you know what? It's it's so easy in our industry to fall into stereotypes. Even when I was a student, somebody said, oh, Leslie's going to bring in some dance tunes. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a classical pianist. What the hell are you talking about?
I love people who break those stereotypes. That's even better,
Oh yeah. It shouldn't matter. But as an educator, you find, it's like looking in a very strange mirror, and you learn what sorts of habits that you adopt and what ones you need to challenge. Even as a Black woman, I knew there were things that I needed to change. And when you start teaching predominantly women and you start teaching predominantly minorities, then you find yourself on unsure footing. It's like, I've never done this before,
Yeah.
And that's the richness that I think somebody who has been in that environment and brought up in that environment brings to education. It's like, I don't have to, look inside and do this sort of vivisection to find out how to relate to the people who are coming to this classroom because I share that background.
You've lived it.
Yeah. And so that's why we need to be inclusive, so that, students who come to these programs who can sense that you're sort of just feeling your way around, if they have a peer, if they have a role model, then that empowers them. And that's kind of what I want to see.
Yeah. We start as educators, we start at a disadvantage anyway, because we have generational references that don't work. I look around the classroom and I think, wait a minute, none of you were born before the year 2000, were you? Oh shit, my references to 1980s rock are not going to work with you.
Yeah, one of the things that I like to teach my students is about, from time to time I teach post-production. And so I have students who can't really relate to 1979 and the movie The Black Stallion, which was one of the movies I thought had the most amazing soundtrack, but it came out 20 years before they were born.
When dinosaurs roamed the earth, yeah.
Yes. Or it's like, you and I having a conversation about Citizen Kane. It's still relevant, but it's so old.
But culturally speaking, yeah. Well, we touch on that with technology, where I have conversations with students about 2-inch tape, and splicing tape and explaining what a window edit is and stuff like that, and they go, wow, you had to wait for the tape to rewind, so taking that to cultural references where you're talking about, stuff in the 1980s, that's ancient history, and not just from a technical perspective or a technological perspective, but from a sociological and cultural perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes there are surprises that you can bring to the students. For example, the Black Stallion soundtrack, the music was composed by Francis Ford. Let's see. The film was directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and the soundtrack was Sofia Coppola.
Really?
And yeah.
I did not know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was interesting, reading about how that collaboration came about. Reading about the Watership Down, the music for Watership Down was composed by a woman whose name escapes me. I'll have to email it to you, but there's all these lovely surprises, or finding out that Ethel Gabriel, who was amazing record producer. I have had the Henry Mancini Pink Panther soundtrack. She produced that album. I'm like, really? The Henry Mancini recording, right? So
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough to be, I have been fortunate enough to be working with the folks who are working on her documentary. And
oh
I'm
yeah,
just,
April Tucker.
yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just blown away because, I think to myself, how the hell did I not know about this woman? How the hell did so many of us not know about her? But again, it goes back to cultural norms that it's hard to believe actually existed. But
yeah. And I mean, we need, that's why we need visibility. That's why we need role models. That's why, we need these networks like Sound Girls and Wham and Normal Novelty. And, there's 70, I don't know if you knew this, but there's at least 70 feminist and women-based organizations, and then just in terms of minorities working in the field, there's a wonderful YouTube video called Black and Game Audio that I recommend everybody look for on YouTube, which talks about the experiences of 4 Black sound designers who work on like AAA video games.
oh, wow.
And then there's the Black Sound Society here in the UK. So all these the purpose of all these organizations is to lift each other up, and they do such a wonderful job of filling those gaps in networking and visibility that we haven't had. And slowly, we're starting to see things change.
It's so nice. And it's so refreshing to me to go to a show and see a woman in front of house and, stuff like that. It just gives me hope for the future. It's,
yeah, same.
I mean,
yeah.
You remember all those old jokes about, trade shows being gatherings for old white guys to show off their ponytails, so, I mean, I think it's so great to see. And, I hope that all of us can contribute to that.
Yeah, same here. One of the things that you just prompted when you were talking about going to trade shows and seeing that kind of thing, I wanted to plug the Sound Girls Leslie Gaston-Bird travel scholarship. So that's another thing
all right.
trying to because a lot of times conference organizers will say something like, we couldn't find any women, or they didn't have the funds to get here, so I started a fund, so that we can work on getting women to get to these conferences. So,
right. Oh, that's awesome.
Worth that change. Yeah.
Oh, how cool.
Thank you, Carrie Kais and Sound Girls, for helping set up the fund.
Absolutely. And lots of kudos to them and to everybody else who has been spearheading these kind of movements. I think it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
And thank you to you. I know you're pressed for time, so we're gonna conclude things and keep it short here. But Leslie Gaston-Bird, thank you so much for being my guest, and I look forward to having you back another time.
Yeah, I'd love to come back, Daniel. Have me anytime. I'll make sure that I give it a little bit longer this time. I just want to say a shout out to you and all the wonderful audio engineers in your community who watch. Keep the faith.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.